We had high hopes for the 6888. Higher hopes than we typically have for Tyler Perry productions. With a strong trailer, cast and a story backed by the unsung heroes of the 6888th Battalion, we thought it would be different than the filmmaker's other work, especially since his writing had to stay within the confines of historical facts. That partially happened, as some truly moving moments highlight the resilience and bravery of the only all-black battalion of the Women's Army Corps who served overseas during World War II, led by Major Charity Adams, Kerry Washington. The 6888 tells the story of how these women created a process to deliver thousands of pieces of backed-up mail and parcels to soldiers and their families during the war. The film is at its best when leaning into their story, sisterhood, and how they overcame when faced with racism, sexism, and adversity. Where it falls short, however, is within the same tropes that often plague Perry's work. Flat and stereotypical depictions of black women distract from the story. The film spends too much time seesawing between the love stories Lena Derricott, Ebony Obsidian, has with her late white lover who was killed at war and a black soldier she meets while serving. Fleshing out the plot and characters with more depth and nuance would have been a more productive use of time. Still, it is important that the 6888th Battalion story is being told. We just hope that it isn't limited to this one film. We break down our thoughts and reactions to the 6888 here. I will never not admire writer-director Tyler Perry for being able to get some of the most talented black actors in Hollywood in his movies, despite many of the movies being quite bad. Oprah Winfrey, Kerry Washington, Sam Waterston, Susan Sarandon, Dean Norris. The problem is rarely ever the cast. In this case, that includes the lesser-known prominent cast members like Ebony Obsidian, Shanice Shante, and Pepe Sanuga. The issue, as always, is the histrionic performances they're likely directed to deliver. On one end, you have Obsidian as Lena melodramatically throwing her body over her special friends. I hesitate to call him her boyfriend, since she specifically says he is not grave. On the other, you have each and every bad white person in the movie being so cartoonishly awful that it's almost funny at times. And it shouldn't be. These women dealt with a lot of racism and other forms of dehumanization. Nothing about that is funny. Even more well-known characters like Winfrey's Mary McLeod Bethune and Sarandon's Eleanor Roosevelt come across as merely human-adjacent, one-dimensional, and instantly forgettable. In the midst of all that, Washington's mouth quiver is doing all her acting for her as Major Charity Adams. It's such a shame because the cast is so talented and obviously the story is an important one to tell. But it's really in the wrong hands. I wonder how a talented black filmmaker would have handled this. My gripe with every Tyler Perry project is that the cast's performances oftentimes feel stiff or hollow, as if they're being directed to act a particular way to deliver a vision that only makes sense to Perry. That said, it's a miracle that Kerry Washington was able to conjure a performance that, in my opinion, saved the premise of the movie. Only her scenes as Major Charity Adams seem to drive home what the 6888 should have been all about. The feat of sorting through a backlog of correspondence between American soldiers and their loved ones while a racist military awaits their failure. Her performance was more arresting than whatever Oprah Winfrey and Susan Sarandon's cameos were meant to rouse. But there weren't too many standouts, even with Ebony Obsidian positioned as one of the main leads. Quality not matching the caliber of talent is an issue that's popped up regularly in Perry's last decade of films, but it would have been nice for him to prove that wrong with 6888. I've been watching Tyler Perry's Sisters since it premiered in 2019. It's a soap opera of a TV series that keeps you hooked with these storylines that have micro-updates and crazy cliffhangers every week. Ebony Obsidian stars on that series and stars as Lena in 6888. Her character on Sisters is so aggravating that it was quite refreshing to see her in this role. But otherwise, ditto on everything Candace and Jara have said about the casting here. For me, I just wonder what would happen if Perry gave the cast and crew ample time to do their jobs instead of rushing to shoot everything with such a tight window. And if he gave another black writer an opportunity instead of writing a script like this in 2 weeks. This is part of the plot I didn't quite understand because, for a film determined to bring a little-known true story to the big screen, it spent a lot of time fleshing out the origins and aftermath of this interracial romance between Lena and Abram, which could have been dialed back to properly honor the work of the 6888th Battalion. Abram's ghost, if we can call it that, had odd cameos that took away from the point of the movie for me. I didn't expect his presence, or lack thereof, to have such a profound impact on Lena either, especially during her assignment overseas. At times, it felt like the movie was trying to manipulate emotional moments out of Lena's grief to justify all the mentions of Abram's tragic death throughout, and I was over it by the time she finally found his grave. Again, this relationship didn't have to become a central part of the 6,888 story, but I guess I can't expect Tyler Perry to commit to a full-on war drama without giving in to his melodramatic tendencies. I think I kept screaming at my TV screen a version of, how is she so sprung on a man she kissed that one time and who she wasn't really in a relationship with, despite him sort of proposing to her? I could believe that maybe the two were in a relationship and that when tragedy struck, she was devastated. But the movie only really puts them in maybe one scene together, two at most, and just asks the audience to just roll with this great love story. Is it love? And is it even a story, for that matter? For a movie to rely so heavily on their dynamic, without actually building their dynamic, is a choice. A bad one. I almost wish the film never entertained a romance between Lena and Private Hugh Bell, because so many of their encounters were dampened by Lena crying over the loss of Abram, which, sure, realistically makes sense. But it's hard to cling to the potential of this budding affair through fleeting conversations that somehow lead to them eventually being wed. I didn't really buy it. I wish they spent as much time developing a real connection between Hugh and Lena as they did building the latter's arc around a dead white guy she was barely committed to. When he tells Lena that he broke off his engagement to the other woman, I literally shook my head in confusion. He had had like 2 conversations with Lena at that point, and she was barely paying him any attention. It felt like such an afterthought of a storyline that was wedged into the film, only because in real life Lena ended up marrying Hugh. I will say that I wrote down, civil rights era fine, in my notes about Jay Reeves, the actor who portrays Hugh. They nailed his whole look down for that era. My biggest issue, though, was the fact that Perry spared us no subtleties in portraying the brutal misogyny the women faced at every turn of the movie. In fact, he seemed more concerned with showing those degrading and minimizing moments than the exceptionalism the film boasts, leaving little screen time to flesh out a proper build-up to Adam's emotional blow-up at General Halt's harsh tirade, which quickly transitioned to the scene where the soldiers suddenly see the result of the 6,888th Battalion's work. The pacing made it hard for me to be completely satisfied with the movie's end, which tries to wrap up any loose ends with postscript and footage of the real Lena before the credits roll. I felt like I learned more at the end of the movie than I did during it, and that's very telling of what the film actually achieved outside of educating us about untold American history. I agree about the pacing of the film, especially toward the end. I would have loved to see a more fleshed-out storyline about their actual mission in Europe. The sorting of the mail seemed to come together super quickly, but in a convoluted way that didn't fully make sense to me by the time the credits started rolling. This could have maybe benefited from him bringing the concept of the film to a talented black female director and producing it. I'm just not confident that he's capable of doing anything else here. The trailer had me convinced that maybe Perry had stepped up his game with this film and his filmmaking. And sure, it's a step up from previous films, but too many elements of this movie left me scratching my head. I couldn't find a feature-length documentary on the 6888 Battalion, though I think it could definitely make a good one in the right hands. But I did find an informative 14-minute video titled Black Women and World War II, the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion on YouTube. I'd maybe suggest viewers watch that instead. Agreed, Taryn. Overall, I hope this movie actually encourages future filmmakers to mine through American history and bring more untold black stories to mainstream consciousness. Maybe then they'll get proper justice.